Okay. Hello, I'd like to call to order the Hinckley Township special meeting for the purpose of a comprehensive plan steering committee meeting and trustees to approve minutes from the April 26, 2022 meeting at 6:30 p.m. Can I get a second from a trustee? Second. Seconded by Sweattick. All in favor say aye. 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 And we will be skipping over the approval of the minutes because we just got them today and we want to read through them. So just so the committee knows, I'm going to do a quick roll call. Paul Easterling. Here. Lou Benson. Here. Richard Pearl. Here. Gary Woolney. Here. Jacob Studer. Here. Kenton Grimes has an excused absence. Cindy Egelman. Here. Terry Walrath. Here. Maria Griffiths. Here. David Yatsko. Here. Paul O'Neill is not present. Brian Cadnam, not present. Kara Pay has an excused absence. Tom Schrader. Here. Jim Bilowski. Here. Chris Kalina may be on virtually. I am not sure. I'll have to check into that. And we have trustees Augustine, Sweattick, and Asherle. David Manley is our zoning commission representative, and he also has an excused absence. Really quickly, before I give the floor over to Arthur, I was going through my timeline of events that led up to this moment. And I have to say, I'm very, very excited about this moment. I hope you guys are equally excited. This is an opportunity for us to hear from the community at large, which is something tangible that we as trustees don't get to do very often. We started this process, believe it or not, June 15th, 2021. So almost to the day a year ago. Really quickly, I sent you guys an email with regard to the survey results. I want to thank you. Your contribution to this entire process has been phenomenal. I appreciate the work that you've done here as well as outside of this room. So thank you for that. Thank you for your service to Hinckley. 3,319 surveys were mailed. 1,240 were returned by the deadline, which was May 27th at noon. 59 were received past the deadline. Had we included those surveys, we would have had a 39% response rate. We got just over 37%. And of the 14 reported never received, 5 were not on the mailing list. So we have corrected that. We have reached out to those folks. The trustees have agreed that we would not extend an opportunity for those 14. But I want you to know that this level of engagement has not been reached in Hinckley before. So 37% is fantastic. So again, thank you to the people in the room who worked as the steering committee, the people behind me who have had constant interactions with us, and the people that filled out the surveys. We appreciate all of you. And I'm going to hand the floor over to Arthur from OHM.
Thank you very much. Good evening, steering committee members. Appreciate you all being here again. We're going to go through a presentation, obviously just a brief overview of where we've been and how we got to this point, as Trustee Augustine has just mentioned. Go over the community survey results. We'll go through our recommendations. We'll talk about our proposed next steps, and then we'll take questions from you. I think if you allow me to kind of go through the results, talk about our recommendations. It might address some questions that you have, and then we can kind of work backwards from there if I was unable to address any of your questions. So as mentioned, we're in the final phase, the recommendations phase. So we've gone through kind of understanding where we're at, outreach with respect to the community survey, analyzing what needs update, what are the issues, what are the opportunities here, and then now we come together for the recommendations. And again, just to remind ourselves, it's always good as a good reminder that we're here to understand what, if anything, needs to be changed to the comprehensive plan or other policy documents related to the comprehensive plan, related to the township. And I want to echo Trustee Augustine's sentiments of really appreciating all of your time. I would recognize that it's a commitment outside daily life and your work during the day. So our team appreciates it. We know there's a lot of hard work that goes into it, a lot of time that you all have spent outside this meeting room, a lot of time you spent inside this meeting room to discuss this. So I just want to let you all know that it goes without saying that we appreciate it. Thank you. I knew I was missing something. Is that better? So we will go right into the community survey results. We'll go question by question. We'll talk a little bit about what we saw overall, and then we'll kind of go into the recommendations, as I mentioned before, and then we'll take questions and have discussion thereafter. So first, as Trustee Augustine had mentioned, 1,240 surveys were received, 3,319 were mailed. That gives us a response rate of about 37%, which is a very good response rate. I will tell you that we've worked on other plans, be it comprehensive, strategic plans, corridor plans, where we haven't had this type of response rate, whether it's in larger cities or even smaller municipalities. So from us as a team, this is a really, really good response rate. So we were really pleased to see that. So we'll go question by question. So the first question was, in the R1 zoning district, the current minimum lot size is 2 acres. Would you like to see the minimum lot size in the R1 district stay the same, increase, or decrease? And as you can see up there, the results, 69% indicated that they would like to see that stay the same. Question 2 was looking at the R2 zoning district, which currently the minimum lot size is 0.75 acres. Question was, would you like to see the minimum lot size in the R2 district increase, stay the same, or decrease? And as you can see there, overwhelming response, 65% said increase. Now, as we talk about lot sizes, these two questions together, obviously the increase in lot sizes can help lower the density, but there's other things too that need to be done in tandem, measures to ensure the layout and design meet the standards that I think you all are looking for as a community, and something that we've heard throughout the conversation through this process. So I just want to mention that, you know, this can help, but it's one aspect of many other aspects, which we'll talk about a little bit later. One of the other things that I will point out that with this question, some of the comments, one of the last questions we had on the survey was kind of a general comments section. Most of the general comments for this question in particular was asking, you know, increase to what? You know, what that increase would be. Some gave some suggestions in terms of 1 acre, 1.5 acres we saw, 2 acres we saw in the comment section. There were some going as much as 3 or 5 acres for this R2. So there was some suggestions, but there was some confusion saying, you know, I'd like to respond, but I don't know to what. You know, I'd like to see it increase, but increase to what? So as we go through this and I get to the recommendations, that'll be one aspect to discuss with respect to R2, looking at these results, understanding what the community wants. What we've discussed as a steering committee as a whole, what is the right number for that? Question 3 was, would you support additional conservation residential development within the township? Overwhelming response, 73.1%, no. So while there's a very clear desire to not permit any additional conservation developments, it is currently in the zoning code. Repealing it could be a challenge, could have a lot of legal ramifications to it. So as we talk about the recommendations going forward, it's what can we do to address this? This has been a subject that we've talked about many, many times and for many, many hours as part of this, whether we've been here or you all as a steering committee. So using this information, understanding the conversation that we've had to date, what can we do to address the concerns with it? Again, in the comment section, a lot of the comments surrounded indicating the most recent development, conservation development at Redwood, the design of it, kind of the lack of character, how it connects with Hinckley. Those were largely the comments in the comment section related to this question in particular. The next question we had was a multiple choice. So the ask was, please select the types of residential development you feel would be appropriate in Hinckley. And we asked to circle all that applied. You see there very clearly, single family, 96.4%, conservation development at 20.8, senior housing at 20, multifamily at 4.6. I will also say from our observations, most individuals just circled single family. There were, I don't know the exact number, but it wasn't a large amount that indicated multiple choices with respect to this. I would dare to say that almost everyone at least selected single family. There wasn't a case that I can recall where just conservation development, senior housing, or multifamily was selected. So you can see too with the 20.8% of conservation development, a little bit of a correlation between those who are interested in seeing that move forward in the township. And as we go back here, indicating that it would be the type of development they feel would be appropriate. Sorry, jumped ahead there. Next question was, would you support additional senior housing to be developed in the B1 and B2 zoning districts? Again, overwhelmingly 77.2% indicated no. I'm going to go through a couple of these here as I group them together in kind of our analysis. The next one was, would you support skilled care or assisted living facilities to be developed in the B1, B2 zoning district? Again, overwhelmingly 78% indicated no. And then the last one in kind of this little group, would you be in favor of senior housing if specific design standards were created to guide the development? Again, no, 68.5%, a little bit less of a no comparatively to the other questions. So what does this say to us? Seems very little support for senior housing or some type of skilled nursing care facility for the village. Currently, I guess the good news to this, currently these uses are listed as conditional uses within those zoning districts, which means that while they're not outright prohibited, they have to go through the conditional use tests outline for the zoning commission in order to get approved. So it's not an outright permitted use in those zoning districts. It is a conditional use. Again, to the question, we internally talked back and forth about, is this something that could be prohibited necessarily in the B1 and B2 district? Yes. Could it be? The problem is that, again, you run up against potential challenges legally with respect to discriminating against certain development types. So it not being at least conditionally allowed within the zoning district is problematic from that standpoint. So again, currently those are conditional uses and have to go through that test to help guide the zoning commission. But we also feel that, as we'll talk about here at the end with our recommendations, that this information coupled with what was talked about in the comprehensive plan can help guide the zoning commission as they are receiving applications for any senior housing, assisted living, skilled care facilities, and use that as a way to guide their decision making. The next question that we asked was an open-ended one. So the question was, please provide 3 words that you would use to define rural as it relates to the character of Hinckley Township. And the correlation here in terms of the size of the words, this is a word cloud, indicates how frequently we heard this word done in the surveys. So you'll see up there scenic, you'll see up there spacious, peaceful, trees, farming, natural, serene, wildlife, green, independence, rustic, privacy. I will say there were some interesting responses here, as you could imagine, with an open-ended question. Some indicate, some gave more than 3 words. There was a few that gave a litany of words that we recorded in the raw results. However, I think what this is showing to us is kind of the general idea when we talk about rural and that term. So there's a pattern that you can kind of begin to see form here, which again, we go back to in the comprehensive land use plan. It talks about goals and objectives. It uses the term rural. We all had a very deep discussion about what rural means to each one of us. And so I think we can take with this some additional insight from the community of what they define as rural, along with what you all had indicated. So again, we'll talk about it in the recommendations, but we see this as an opportunity to give additional information as design applications are coming forward. They use the term rural, using this as a basis of understanding in addition to what the zoning commission sees as defining as rural. Next, we get into talking about the historic town center. So the question here was, would you support additional development in the historic town center in Hinckley? Yes, at 53.2% was the response here, with 46.8% saying no. So there's some support for additional development specific to downtown, the historic town center. This aligns with a couple of the goals that are in the comprehensive plan when looking at, where is appropriate development, a little bit of the expansion of the historic town center and what can be developed. So again, it's aligning with the land use, the character image, and economic development goals and objectives stated in there. Next question was, again, related to town center. Would you favor expansion of public water to town center? 57.3% indicated yes. 42.7% indicated no. Coupled with that, would you favor expansion of sewer in town center? 51.8% indicated yes, 48.2% indicated no. One observation that we saw while putting in the survey results, there wasn't too much actually of a correlation between those in favor of developing the historic town center and those supporting sewer or water in the town center. It was a bit of a mix. You would think kind of naturally, if you support maybe development in town center, you would also be in favor of sewer and water, understanding that obviously there's tax implications to that, how it's getting paid. Those were also questions in the comment section. How is this being paid for? What is the township going to do? I think there was discussions previously. This conversation had been brought up before. Those are also listed in the comments saying, we've talked about this over and over again, and the answer is still the same. So those were some of the comments that we heard in relation to the sewer and water. Not too many comments, really, if any, as it relates. Let me go back to the question of just additional development in the historic town center. It was pretty straightforward of a yes or no that they voted. And again, that correlation of in favor or not in favor of developing town center, really no correlation to support or lack of support for public water or sewer for the town center. Next question was, would you like to see Hinckley Township identify areas to preserve and conserve land through a green space levee? So as you see up there, 66.4% indicated yes. I will say that in the comment section, this was one where, questions of what does that mean? What is that implication? The money aspect to it. A little bit of confusion, I think, too. There was a couple comments of, we have the reservation, Hinckley Reservation through the Cleveland Metro Parks. Why would we need more of those? Were some comments there. But I think what this is showing to us as our team looking at this is it begins to follow suit to some of the conversation that we've had, both with the public and with you all as a steering committee, relating to specifically looking for land to preserve and correlating back to that term rural. Right? If we go back to some of those terms, we talk about open space, we talk about forested land, we talk about trees, we talk about scenic, and those are a lot of the things that come into play here when you're talking about conservation of land. So it was interesting to kind of see that correlation with respect to individuals when asked about the three words to define rural. They talk spacious, forest, trees, scenic, and they were also in favor of the green space levy or looking to preserve and conserve land in the future. So as we go into more details about this one in particular, we'll start talking about, how this response begins to align again with the plan objectives, goals of the comprehensive plan related to land use and related to economic development. So based on our review, so the recommendations that we're going to have forward, and then we'll go into questions and conversation. Based on our review of the comprehensive plan, OHM's team's review of the comprehensive plan, our discussions as a group, both at you all as steering committee and the public, and looking at the survey, we came up with the following recommendations. And I have all 5 listed here, and then I will go through and kind of break down each one of them and have a little bit more discourse to explain this a little bit further. So first, it's developing design guidelines, standards to guide future development, be that residential or commercial. Beginning to identify lands for conservation, so no development, no growth areas. Looking to update the zoning district map, specifically for the town center. General updates to the township zoning code, specifically in area regulations, and I'll go into a little bit more detail of what that means. And then lastly, develop and update design standards specifically for the conservation development district. So obviously this relates back to number 1, but in the current zoning code, there are specific design standards outlined for the conservation development. Overall, the comp plan itself, as we view it, is still relevant. There are specific details that we feel, and that's where some of these recommendations are stemming from, that would help strengthen not only the comprehensive plan, but also strengthen the zoning code and how development is done or not done moving forward in the future. We've said it before, and we talked about it at previous meetings. The comprehensive plan is that guide. It's that framework to guide decisions, but it's really the zoning code. The zoning code is what actually governs those decisions, right? Those are the hard laws, the zoning laws that we have to abide by. So we feel that these recommendations and kind of a little bit of the disconnect between what is shown, stated in the zoning code versus what's talked about in the comprehensive plan is leading to some of this maybe undesired development type and maybe the aesthetic of what that development is coming to be. So let me go into each one of these with a little bit more detail. So as we talk about developing design guidelines and standards for future development, and as we talk about developing and updating the design standards for the conservation development districts, we know that there is, a healthy debate going on in terms of with respect to permitted and conditional uses, what's allowed, what's not allowed. And we'll talk about that a little bit further with updating specific aspects of the zoning code. But what we feel is a lot of it, what it boils down to is providing specific guidance, providing specific measures to really elevate the level of design and this type of development. So oftentimes when we have talked about some of the development within the commercial districts, within the conservation development districts, as far as, most recently, a lot of it comes down with the look and feel and the way that it's been developed. We've done this in other communities, and I'll jump back to this. We've done it in other communities where we've developed these design standards, these design guidelines, interchangeable there, to guide developers with what type of aesthetic is desired for the community. It sets a floor. It raises the floor. That's the goal of these design guidelines and enhancing some of the design standards here. We want to raise the floor, which ultimately raises the quality of the development. And it also creates a signal of kind of an intention from the community, from the township, of this is minimally what we are going to accept, right? And oftentimes it can, kind of deter developers who may, be undesired to develop in that community because they have to reach that level of design standard. And that's a good thing because it's setting a standard, it's setting a floor and saying this is what we expect. So if I go back, what we're talking about is addressing setbacks, how far a building, should be set back from the public right of way. It's talking about building materials. What are the type of materials that would be permitted within the specific, zoning districts? For a residential, it could be an array of building materials that's acceptable. But in our commercial districts, maybe there is a brick or specific wood that would be desired within those districts. Same thing with lighting, same thing with landscaping, so on and so forth. As we talk about the conservation development district specifically, it's looking at those design guidelines that are currently in, and if I reference it correctly, I believe that's 6R 1.7, which lists the development standards for conservation developments. If you start looking through there and even comparing, I think, some of those design standards with even our regular R1 and R2, the setbacks don't necessarily, for example, and we were talking about this last time, the setbacks don't necessarily match. The setbacks within that conservation development are 30 feet setback from the right of way. In an R1 district, it's 90. In an R2, it's 75. So you can see some of the disconnect just in those standards alone. And we're just talking residential, right? Not even getting into the commercial districts and what those standards are in terms of appropriate setbacks. And that's just one element, right? Not getting into the landscaping, not getting into lighting, building materials, so on and so forth. So we feel for both of these, this would really strengthen, we feel, the community and the township's position. Again, setting that standard for the type of development that comes. And for the most part, and we'll talk about it in a couple of slides here, in those area regulations talking about permitted and conditional uses. So that coupled with what we're talking about here, we feel will help strengthen cases for appropriate development types in the township and the community. The second one, and this goes back to the conservation and the discussion that we've had about preserving the rural character and how important that is for the community. Again, talked about natural, serene, green, wildlife. Those are some of the terms that were used, in the question in the survey when we asked to describe rural. So if you take those, this proposed conservation, green space tax levy, how the mechanism works is up for conversation and something that needs to be discussed at a level higher than myself. But the idea here is looking for lands within the community, within the township, to preserve. only recreation, right? Walking trails, paths, things of that nature being the primary permitted use. Maybe some limited residential development could be permitted. Maybe that's a conditional use in terms of permitted, maybe. And I think some of the questions that we received, or some of the comments we received with respect to this question in the survey, was concern over the taxes, who's paying for it, why are we doing this, so on and so forth. So, there's a question of, does the township put forth a tax levy? I think one was done previously and I think was knocked down. But there's other ways to do this as well. There's other partner organizations, and on the screen there, I listed just three of the many that are relevant. Obviously, the Cleveland Metro Parks are already here with the Hinckley Reservation and that land. The Medina County Park District is another organization that has been working to identify environmentally sensitive lands that the desire is to preserve for the natural environment. And that mission is in tandem even with West Creek Conservancy. They're a group that is largely focused on Cuyahoga County, but have actually started to expand just given their resources, given their knowledge, given their understanding of how to kind of work these deals, use grant dollars and other unique financing tools to purchase land. And when we talk about land, what is that land that we're talking about? So first I go back to the future land use map. In here, obviously the darker green indicates the Hinckley Reservation, and that's dedicated land that's preserved, that currently exists. But then in the other shades of green, we have those kind of two lighter shades of green that are identified as limited and potential conservation residential development. Now, a lot of this came through the exercise of asking the question during the comprehensive planning process of, where do you want to grow? What areas should we grow as a community? And what areas should we preserve? So one of the suggestions, moving forward, if this is an idea amenable to you all as the steering committee and the trustees, is starting to look at this map as a starting point to identify lands. The other map to look at, which seems a little straightforward, but sometimes is overlooked, is the environmental sensitive areas map that was developed as part of the 2015 comprehensive plan. We talked about this, I think, way back in my first meeting with you all, that there's about 748 acres within the 100-year floodplain. We have about 4,400 acres that has some slope issues, about another 1,000 in the wetland, and roughly about 5,000 plus acres, right? That just kind of due to the environmental constraints may be undeveloped or not being able to develop. Now, I think we were talking before, and I think I have to say this coming from an architecture planning and engineering firm. Anything can be engineered, right? If you have enough money for it, anything can be engineered. However, if we go back to the question of how you define rural, and if we go back to the plan goals and objectives from the comprehensive plan in 2015, it talked about preserving that rural character within Hinckley, right? Identifying strategic growth, appropriate growth, but preserving that rural character. And as we saw from the survey we just put out, that rural character includes this kind of natural, serene, green, open space, natural areas, forested areas. So as we look at this recommendation, we feel that it's not entirely on the township and the community of kind of lifting up that burden, but could create a partnership with these local organizations. There's other organizations that can be included in that too, but we feel that this is a good start, and we feel that these two maps begin to get the ball rolling in terms of identifying what that land is. There are other considerations, such as, land that's, that comes up for sale, things of that nature, availability, right? But again, we feel this is a smart start to things. The next thing that we wanted to talk about, group together number 3 and 4, and this goes back to some of the specific questions that I had mentioned, is first, there are areas and elements of the zoning code which should be updated to support the comprehensive plan. First is the limits of what would be considered town center, the town center district, the B2. I'm going to jump just a moment. So to the left is the zoning map. To the right is the future land use map. And so as you see there, those limits that are shown in the future land use map are greater than what's currently zoned for the town center. If you recall back to, again, our first meeting together, this was one of the things that stood out to us as our team through our audit, is kind of the lack of correlation between the future land use map and the zoning map. And I think through some of these questions that we asked from the community, it began to signal that the desire is there with respect to town center and looking at additional development. Again, this coupled with those design standards we talked about helps kind of, again, preserve the character and the type of development that occurs there. Obviously, the question comes down to water and sewer. That also is going to play a factor if that is decided to move forward. But again, that's a much larger question, for the community and for the township to consider. But at the very least, where we're at right now, we feel that, expanding this district and matching this up with the future land use map for the zoning district makes sense, coupled with those design standards that we talked about in the first recommendation. The fourth one that we grouped here together really just talks about kind of general updates throughout the zoning code to match, what we've talked about here as a community, what we've talked here as a steering committee, and what we've heard in the survey. So there are several kind of permitted and conditional uses that we feel that should be examined or re-examined just to make sure it's in line. I stated before, we looked at that question in regards to senior housing, assisted living, and care facilities. As we heard from the community, there's a lack of desire to see those. Could it be, being burned, similar to conservation developments, being burnt with some recent developments and not just meeting that standards? Of course it could be. It could also be a thousand other things that are attributing to that. But right now, those are conditional uses. So it has to go through that conditional use test moving forward. So I think looking through that based on some of the survey results, making sure that, the appropriate development is permitted within those zoning districts. And I'm talking R1, R2, B1, B2, and the industrial. And those uses, those developments that, should be maybe held to a higher standard, scrutinized a little bit more, discussed a little bit further, those going under the conditional use category. Also with that, we talk about the existing area regulations within each of those zoning districts. As I talked about before, if you look at the design standards that exist for the conservation development, they have a 30-foot setback. In R1, it's 90, and R2, it's 75. For one of the other ones we talked about, the idea of raising the minimum acreage for R2, currently at 0.75, what is that? That's a question to have of what is the appropriate increase there with respect to the minimum acreage. But again, if you recall back to some previous discussions we had, that acreage, that lot size is not the only component that's going to help with the design and character. It is also the building line. It's that setback. It's those height regulations. It's those elements too, which are going to help kind of develop that character and that design standard within the community. So we just want to make sure that, really looking at those area regulations, even in zoning districts where maybe we don't provide a design standard, those design standards, if I go back to number 1 and 5, the conservation design standards is really updating that section 6R1.7. The new design standards can govern all of the zoning districts, or it can govern just the commercial zoning districts, or it could just govern the residential zoning districts. So there's options there based on the desire of, the steering committee and the trustees and the zoning commission, moving forward. So if the design standards aren't applied to, the entire township and all the zoning districts, looking at these specific area regulations that exist right now is what we are recommending in order to make sure, again, the type of development that's desired occurs here in Hinckley Township. That's the important part. So very quickly, just kind of from an overall statement, I'm going to go back to just show all 5 so we can see them together. The key themes from the 2015 comprehensive plan, really have remained relevant. We talk about preserving the rural character of the community, being very strategic about development. There's a few exceptions to that with respect to senior housing. That was something that we'd heard both in our conversations as a group with the community and as a steering committee, the concerns over that, along with, specifically where to grow. But through this survey, I think we've established some additional information that can be used to help us, again, correlate the comprehensive plan with the zoning code. So at the end of the day, that's really where this audit leads us, is to how do we begin to update certain aspects of the zoning code to align with the comprehensive plan to get the desired development or a higher development standard, right? Because again, if you set those kind of higher standards, it's not going to necessarily facilitate everybody, jumping at an opportunity to develop, right? Those standards have to be reasonable, but oftentimes we've seen in communities, and I consulted with a planning and land use legal firm just to ask them their opinion of what they've seen with respect to these design guidelines and how they've held up. And a large part of them have held up. It's when I think they get a little obscene in terms of their requirements and what they're requesting, that they get knocked down a little bit. But in general, they've held up in court and in appeal cases. So again, in general, the 2015 plan remains very relevant. The big pieces here are very specific elements related to what happens from a development standpoint. How do we guide that? How do we make sure it happens in a way that makes sense for this township? How do we make sure it makes sense that, the community, the zoning commission has an opportunity to hear out that development, as well as raise it to a specific standard in the township. And then I think lastly, the survey results, as we talked about that response rate, can be used as an additional kind of supplemental information to the zoning commission as they're making some of these decisions on these conditional uses. You can see with some of these questions, where the community's pulse is. So I think that in tandem with the conditional zoning certificate test, which is just looking at my notes, chapter 7, which lists the conditions to get a conditional use permit. Those all together can be used to make a valid decision based on, does this meet the comprehensive plan goal? Does this meet the standards in the zoning code? So all of that together. So in closing, these are the 5 recommendations that we feel is going to help, again, based on our conversation that we've had as a steering committee, as a community, thinking back and going back and looking at some of the, most recent developments, kind of what the sticking points seem to be in that conversation. And this is what we feel will help guide that either for future development or at least to raise the standard for developers that are coming in here. Lastly, and then open up to questions to the steering committee members. Sorry for jumping through. In terms of our next steps, going forward, we have all the raw results that we put together. It's in an Excel spreadsheet file as we entered all of them in, and we're going to send it as a PDF. And I think a PDF and an Excel spreadsheet to the village or to the township, to the township. And then in addition, we are going to write just kind of a summary memo that goes through the conversation I just had with you all in terms of what our 5 recommendations are, adding a little bit more discourse, what we talked about here, providing a couple of those example images that I showed there, just to kind of have like I don't want to call it a report because it's not really a report, just kind of having a final document to refer back to as we move forward. So with that, I'm going to take a swig of water and take questions from the steering committee.
Arthur, that was enlightening. I was really surprised. Like I said, I went through the timeline today, and when I looked back at the July 6th meeting, all of the trustees last year said that the things that they thought were going to be of pertinence were conservation developments, senior housing, and sustainability. And we opted as a steering committee not to include the sustainability question in the survey. So curiosity has me wondering, if that was a pertinent topic to the citizens of Hinckley, but I think it's really interesting to get these results.
So Arthur, Tom Schrader. So my understanding is that your recommendation is no changes to the current comprehensive plan, and that these that you've outlined are essentially zoning issues and not comprehensive plan issues.
That is correct.
Okay.
That's correct. It boils down to taking the considerations we have, in the comprehensive plan. It talks about developing design guidelines. It talks about preserving land, but there's not the mechanism in there to say, do this, right? And that's intentional, because the comprehensive plan, again, is that vision guiding blueprint document. So what it comes down to is there's elements in there that can help with some of this development, some of the concerns we feel that we've been hearing and we've been reviewing. And it really boils down to the zoning code to kind of really govern them going forward.
Sure.
Now, I will say the design guidelines, there have been instances where those design guidelines aren't necessarily adopted as part of a zoning ordinance or included in the zoning ordinance, that they're guidelines. They just exist as an additional document similar to the comprehensive plan. Now, that gives a little bit more room for a developer to say, well, I don't have to do that, right? Or, a future development, I don't have to do that. So it does leave a little room for that to occur. But that has been done in other municipalities where that guidance, those guidelines, those standards are just a separate document, and applicants are referred to them when they do their development proposals.
So at this point, as a steering committee, our duty is to recommend recommend change or no change to the plan. And based on your findings, our recommendation likely has to be no changes.
But I was want to suggest a tweak to that, though. The couple debates that have happened in the township have been with your senior housing.
Yeah.
One of the ways they justified it says, well, the comprehensive plan says that you want.
Sure.
This survey data is contrary to that. So I think we need to clear up where the recommendations were made in the comprehensive plan and maybe remove those recommendations, senior housing and some of the other things, and reiterate that it's really a blueprint, that it's a guide of the direction that the township residents want to see, but it's not absolutes. The powers with zoning and trustees and the Board of Zoning Appeal. So I think there is some updates based upon the data that came back that says,
well, while I understand what you're saying, I don't think that as a taxpayer, I wouldn't want to pay for a full update.
full update, agree.
And secondly, I mean, not to be a jerk, but as evidenced by what happened with the zoning on the school building, supported or not, right? The comprehensive plan said, change it. And the zoning commission said, we're not doing that. And the trustees said, we're not doing that.
Comprehensive plan didn't say change.
It absolutely did. The future land use.
Sure. It was debated on the lines.
No, it's not. The land use map said to turn it, bring it up. We got it. I'm not saying I support it. I'm just saying if the trustees and the zoning commission can say, it's a guideline, I'm not using it, why bother changing anything?
I think we can amend it by just saying, here are the current
Why bother
results.
changing?
Because we have to bring in the current survey results, which are contrary to the existing.
They're
results.
not. They're not in all cases.
They are in some.
In some. But so what if the next group of zoning people and the next group of trustees say, I don't agree. I'm just going to do what I want anyhow. Why bother changing it at all? Why bother having it? Be quite honest. If the trustees and the zoning commission are going to do whatever they want and take it and say, yeah, I understand this is what the community said, but I don't give a shit.
Tom, I don't think that's a fair statement.
I think it is.
I do not. I think that's your opinion.
Sure, that's what we're here
your
for.
interpretation, but I don't think that's what anybody said.
That was the outcome, Jack.
That may be the outcome, but that's not what was said, and that's not your interpretation.
So how is the outcome not aligned with my interpretation?
Because when you consider all the other elements of the comprehensive plan that allow us to make a decision based on the vision of that plan and not just exerting that future land use map, that's how I made my decision at that night. But for you to say, we said to hell with everything, that's not a fair statement.
Well, that's your opinion. We're both entitled to our opinions. And in this case, as a trustee, yours carries weight, mine doesn't. And that's okay. I'm just saying that in the future, you might not be a trustee and someone else might have a different opinion. And they might pick a different portion of the comprehensive plan and say, I don't think this is really important right now.
No one ever said something wasn't important.
Well, by your action, you did. By your action, you said,
That's not for this evening, okay?
Well,
Let's continue on with the discussion here.
no, hold on a second. You don't get to derail this. That's not your choice.
You are derailing.
No, I'm having the conversation. Do we make a recommendation to change it or not? That's what our job was, right?
Correct.
As a steering committee, our job is we make a recommendation to update the comprehensive plan or not. That's the conversation.
Melissa? Maria Griffiths. Can the plan be updated or amended without running a full update? Can the steering committee make a recommendation to just amend? Because I do agree. I think it was quite clear senior housing is no longer, now that it was really explained to people and they've kind of seen what it is, that it wasn't just a vague question of, yeah, it'd be nice for people as they grow older to stay in Hinckley without really, now that they understand what that really comes down to. Things have changed. And I think that does need to be amended, but can we recommend an amendment to the plan without running a full update?
A recommendation for an amendment can happen. I would just probably include the information we already have and change the resolution that is on the books from 2015, saying that we amend it to recognize the new update as per the audit from this year, 2022. And that information will be pertinent in the comprehensive plan. But what I'm hearing Arthur say is that regardless if we have senior housing in the comprehensive plan or not, and that's just my example because that's the one you brought up, the zoning resolution really needs to mimic these results. The zoning resolution is the thing that we say, yeah, we kind of have to have senior housing legally, and that's just my gut instinct. I haven't talked to the prosecutor's office about it, but what do we do to make it so it's more difficult to do and make it a design that we want to see? And I think that goes back to what Arthur's saying. It's specific to the zoning resolution. The zoning commission now is tasked, I think, with making sure that this audit comes to fruition.
I agree with you, and I think a lot of this will come down to the zoning thing, but I think the survey results should be reflected as an amendment to the plan, that's something. The other, while I got the floor for a moment, is question 2 with the R2. There was a very heavily set to, we should consider some kind of increase in the acreage. Again, that's a zoning not specific to the plan. I understand that. But in your 5 things, I'm not sure which one that fits. Is that just?
It would go, yes, it would go general because it goes back to, and this also I want to address the first question that Tom, Marie, and Jim, you were bringing up in the example that you were giving. So that one in particular for the potential increase of lot size, that would be considered under this number 4, looking at these general updates that, based on some of the questions and what are the existing area regulations, what's existing right now for permitted and conditional uses, that those should kind of be reexamined as, in light of these additional survey results. So it goes back to the other point too of the survey results that, creating an amendment or doing something effectively to recognize the results of this survey, recognize, these recommendations. I think that goes a longer way to add on top of the comprehensive plan and what was stated there. Going back and kind of striking, that from the record, at a certain point, valid or invalid, that conversation was had about that. But I think adding this in addition to that as, these survey results and these recommendations is showing that growth, that there was a bit of a, I think Maria, you pointed out, there was an idea about it at the time, but, maybe it wasn't understood properly, back in 2015, 2014, when it was first discussed. But since that time, it has been, better understood and understood in the way of how we may or may not want this to occur. And so in the zoning right now, it is a conditional use. Right. So you have to come and basically satisfy, everything that's listed in Chapter 7 and the general standards there in 7.3 for conditional zoning certificate. Right. And I think these survey results and then ultimately the other recommendation of just design standard of if if a development comes in and pass those conditional use tests. Right. The zoning commission is going to look at it and be like, it passed the conditional use tests. Right. We understand that the community is not in favor of it based on these recent survey results. So they have to weigh those two pieces up. The third element we're trying to say we want to introduce is, again, those design standards to say, if they vote in favor of it, it adds effectively another item for that conditional use test. That in addition to the items listed here, you also have to meet these design standards that we have as a township and the community for your design.
But did I understand that those should be, if they're a separate document, separate from either the zoning code or the comprehensive plan, it doesn't necessarily carry a lot of weight.
Correct. It needs to, our recommendation would be inserted into, it would be a zoning resolution.
So it should,
Whether it's a specific chapter, is its own standalone chapter, whether it's inserted as a sub chapter under each one of the specific districts, because there are some things in a residential, zoning district that occur that wouldn't occur in a commercial district.
Sure.
For example, right? That could be building materials, that could be setbacks, lighting, landscaping,
Sure.
Things of that nature. And if I go back, hang on. Here, this example that I'm showing, my mouse will work. To the right here was one that was done, and there was specific design standards done for different subsections of a specific area, right? Now, what I'm referring to here and what we're recommending is kind of township wide, community wide. But in this instance, with this example, they were looking at a specific set of parcels and acreage. I think it was over 2,000 acres, something like that was going to get redeveloped. And they wanted, a set of design standards, and they kind of parceled it up to say, we want to see, in terms of permitted uses, more residential here. We feel it's more appropriate for commercial here. And so within each one of those districts, they had more specific standards under those districts. So again, whether it's its own chapter, right? It's chapter 8, 9, 10, whatever the next chapter is in the zoning resolution. And it's a set of design standards, and in there the language reads, this applies to, these zoning districts, or it's a subsection under each one of the zoning districts. So that way, in an R2, right, specific things can be mentioned for the R2 and any development in the R2. Same thing with the B1 or B2, right?
Sure.
That would be, to take it a step further, that would be even more of our recommendation, because you can get down to the specifics of, in that B2, specifically to town center, what is the type of development that is appropriate there? There may be a different, I would argue that there would be a different type of, go to the map, the zoning map. There would be a different type of design standard that you would want in your town center, right, than you would, out here along West 130th to a certain degree, building materials, things of that. Little things. I'm not talking, major elements or anything like that. But there is that distinction of what you would permit, what you would like to see in your town center. There's a lot of, in terms of building materials, a little bit more wood in terms of a building material here than you would see necessarily at Center in 130th or at Boston in 130th. So that might be something that's different there in that B2 zoning district than it is in the B1 zoning district, just to use an example.
Can you flip back to the survey results? I want to make sure I'm accurate on something.
Which question?
Town center.
Town center. This one,
Here's, I just want to know how you got to something. This came up when the discussion came up for the school. Is it additional, or is it enhance or expand? I think we're still unclear on what's supposed to happen with the town center. Do you want to improve upon what's there today before we stretch it out? It gets back to, I think one of the running questions is, some point, and this is the township will have to do it, is align the future use map with, let that be reviewed again. And that's nothing that we're going to do, because it brings up a lot of questions. There's an area marked as business that it's shocked everybody that was a business area. So I'm wondering, how is your group distinguish between expansion and enhancement, number one?
Yeah, our group looked at it as attributing it to what is on the future land use map, looking at that area for additional development. So supporting what's there, but we see kind of supporting, that word support also meaning kind of expanding it to what that future land use map is showing for that question.
Okay. And then going to your recommendations, you talked about potentially, and I don't know if this was just in general, lighting, landscape, because I didn't ever see anybody talk about lighting as they want more lighting. In fact, some people are worried about too much light. So
yeah, that was just to talk about what could be addressed in those guidelines. It's not to say that should be addressed in the guidelines. Really, what those guidelines should address is that when you look at the existing code, there's certain elements that are all stated what are the standards, right? Including lighting. What's the foot candle? What's the spill off need to be? Does it need to be an absolute zero spill off once you get to that property line? Things of that nature. So that's what I'm referring to in those guidelines, is not to hash something up to create a new issue or potentially a new problem. No, it's to address what are the design standards that are currently in the code and making sure that, however they're stated, if they make sense, if they need to be adjusted somehow. So you mentioned the lighting, maybe whatever it is right now should drop down a bit, right? Whatever that foot candle is in terms of permitted lighting. Maybe it's also the type of lighting, right? That's the other component too, making sure that lighting is pointing downward as opposed to kind of open face lighting. This also goes back to kind of circling a little bit, looking at, as you talk about these standards though, what you would like to see maybe in town center. Maybe you're okay with seeing a little bit of that open lighting in town center, not necessarily for a project, but maybe along the streetscape, right? Because it's like an historic type light in the town center. So that could be a difference that's, within that specific zoning district versus, a B1 or somewhere else, and just making sure, listen, you have to light, you can light your building, you can light your parking lot. It should not be spilling over to neighbor's property, right? And that's especially important, I think, when you have, the zoning districts where you have commercial or especially industrial, next to residential, right? There's oftentimes that those specific design standards are enhanced, increased even more to say, okay, you're next to a residential, that setback is a little bit further, that landscaping is a little bit more robust, right? To create that buffer. That lighting requirement is way more specific because we want to make sure that, that spill off, maybe even stops before the property line over there. So that's what we're referring to with that. Yeah.
So Paulie's telling, so you may want to update your recommendations to not say would and will, but could and may.
Yeah.
Because then it doesn't have the finality that that's going to be done.
Yep.
I also have another question, and it gets back to what Jack had talked about earlier in our meetings about how we're aligning these to the objectives in the comprehensive plan. And I don't see any recommendation as to how they might line up with them. Looking at the land use objectives, because it's really what we're talking about most of what the survey covered. We have support senior housing and skilled care in the township. We obviously now see that the latest opinion within Hinckley is not to have those developed. And so I would say that the objective of our committee, the mandate of our committee would be to make a recommendation to update that objective, not to move it forward from the zoning and all these other things. But I thought our purpose was to make recommendations about updating the comprehensive plan and what it says. And so we may want to say, not support senior, I'm not using the word not for that, but saying we currently don't support senior housing and skilled care. I'm not sure how we would word that, but just to say that's not a priority any longer for the community. The same with the conservation developments. Revise conservation developments requirements to encourage high quality development within future areas. We may want to revise that as well, that we aren't going to encourage the development of additional conservation development. So that's hard for me to say because I live in one, so I'm listening to what the community is saying. I'm saying this may be something that we want to focus our attention on are the objectives and not what's going to happen with it after that.
And Paul, if I can respond to that, I think that's a fair statement too, in that's where I get at the bringing together, I think, the survey results and the recommendations that we're giving to add to what was stated in the comprehensive plan. Because you're right, there are specific objectives that are calling out for that. And so I think this is what's used. Stricken, like taking it out from there is not something we were recommending because, at a certain point that was the thought.
It's not up to you to make that.
No, absolutely. No, yeah.
It's the survey results.
Yeah.
And then let us decide.
No, absolutely. That's what we're saying, though. We're not saying that wasn't part of our recommendations because we feel that was valid to kind of show where the community was at that point, using these existing community survey results to show where it's headed, and then really saying, the teeth of where it could help is through kind of updating those elements of the zoning code. But as a look at the kind of plan components as a whole, kind of their overarching statements, we still feel that based on the conversation that we've had and the results that it's still valid. We talk about land use, a balanced land use pattern that ensures Hinckley's rural character is preserved and enhanced while carefully planning for growth and development, right? And we're saying these are some of the recommendations that we believe will help strengthen achieving, like specifically that land use objective. But you're right, with some of those objectives, what the committee wants to, additionally recommend to what we're saying to the trustees and to the zoning commission of how to address that is up to you all.
Just a question for the committee, and I'll say yes for me. Surprised with some of the results?
Somewhat.
With some of the ones.
Somewhat. Yeah. I'm surprised that many people supported water and sewer in town.
Me too. I thought that would be a.
I was shocked. I'm more than surprised. I was shocked.
Agreed.
Arthur, Monique Asherle,
Yeah.
question. Kind of following up on what Jim had asked about updating the zoning district map for town center. I'm not understanding how we're expanding it because B2 currently is already large and it's very undeveloped. So I don't understand how we're getting an undeveloped area to making it even larger.
Well, we're just trying to match up with what we're seeing and hearing to what was in the future land use plan. That's our recommendation, is to say we think that the two should match. Now, the limits of that is still in some degree up for further discussion because it's a conversation of exactly what are those limits.
Mm-hmm.
We think that it makes, continues to make sense, where the limits are that's showing on the future land use map.
Mm-hmm.
But that's a question too to the steering committee in some ways is, does that need to be looked at further with respect to those limits? We feel that that's what was developed as part of that comprehensive plan, the original comprehensive plan in 2015. And again, coupled with some of the other recommendations in terms of design standards, would keep that high level of quality there. But that's still up for, I think, could be up for additional discussion from the steering committee if they feel, we agree that it should be expanded, but maybe we need to have an additional conversation about what that limit is. We feel that it should match what's on that future land use map.
Are you saying we can recommend?
I'm sorry, you got to say your name.
Oh, sorry. Natasha Kalis, 1809 Ridge Road. I was just clarifying what you were just saying is that one of the recommendations could be to update the future land use map as part of the process of the amendment that was mentioned.
No, we are saying that the zoning district map should be updated to match the limits that's showing on the future land use plan.
Can the future land use map be reviewed at this time of this committee, or can they recommend that, or no?
I believe that they could recommend.
Okay.
I don't see why they couldn't recommend that. I mean, the steering committee can recommend, not taking any of our recommendations. They can add, 5 more recommendations, based on what they're seeing with this. So that's entirely up to them. But this is what
So you're recommending to them, and they're going to recommend to the township is how the process works.
Correct.
Which is not the way I was understanding it when we started this process. I was under the impression that the steering committee got us here and steered the process of the audit, and the planning company that we paid for gave the trustees their recommendation for us to move forward based on the surveys.
So will this group meet one more time to make formal recommendations? Because that's the next step, right? We're saying
No.
you guys are going to make the recommendations, or is that happening next?
From my understanding, it's OHM that makes the recommendations.
Correct. But he just said it's you guys.
I know. I'm just saying that's my understanding. It's OHM that's making the recommendations. I would suggest that maybe we can add a couple things. I thought it was perfectly worded about making sure, suggest that the objectives line up with these results. That could be a suggestion we make, but the recommendation. So I think ours may be suggestions and the recommendations come from
No,
OHM.
that's actually, he just said.
I know. I'm just.
Okay, I just want to make sure you guys know you have the control here.
Back
Well, that's what he said. I don't think
According
that.
to the contract, the planning company, OHM, is giving the recommendation.
To the committee, and then the committee.
No,
No, the trustees that signed the contract.
I want to clarify, but go ahead, Maria.
All right, but going back to, when you say the map, the comprehensive plan doesn't need updated, the future use map is part of that 2015 comprehensive plan. So at the time when you say, well, we should align, but again, at that time in 2015, wow, they thought things were going to be developed and expanded. Here it is 7 years later, and that downtown, as Monique actually said, there's a lot of land that hasn't been developed. So maybe it's not, we need to update the zoning, the master plan, but once again, we go back to the plan isn't perfect, and that's what this survey's showing. And I would argue that you saying it's kind of the senior housing, that the master plan doesn't need changing. I think it does. I mean, I think we're showing a lot of things where it does not a full update, but I think needs amended. And I don't think we need to just say, well, in 2015, we said it's going to be this, let's change the zoning. In 7 years, we haven't even used what we have. It's time to look the reverse direction at the comprehensive plan.
Didn't the survey results say that we should expand it?
Well, again, it said expand development in the city. It didn't say expand the historic downtown. It said expand development with. It was, in the end, it was a poorly worded question because it can be interpreted two ways.
Well, it said additional.
Right.
It didn't say expand.
And
Additional.
additional, which doesn't say
Additional development
expand.
in the downtown.
Right, in the downtown, which says as it stands, we should develop more of what's already there. It didn't say
Right.
expand it the
Right.
way the future use does. So saying suddenly that, oh, we should expand it to the future use, I don't think that's what the survey said.
So that was our interpretation of it. And to clarify, Natasha, correct? To clarify for Natasha, Trustee Augustine is correct. We want to work with the steering committee to give our recommendations and do this together as a team because we want to be collaborative with it. But I didn't misspeak. The trustee is correct. Trustee Augustine is correct that our recommendations will go to the trustees.
And then the trustees will vote, or it's done.
They're supposed, OHM planning is supposed to give us the recommendation and then the trustees have a conversation about it. I can't speak for what that conversation is going to be or what it's going to look like. Certainly the recommendation from them and from the steering committee will be something that we will take into account. But for me, the surveys speak clearly. I didn't see too many things that were close.
Yes, I'm just trying to understand the process of so the next step would be either amending the comprehensive plan, which these things, or the zoning process, like you're mentioning.
It's an amendment of the comprehensive plan to include the audit results. I think I already said that, but maybe I didn't. So we will, that will be the first thing, is amending the original resolution from 2015 to incorporate these audit results. The second section would be for the zoning commission to then take those results with the new comprehensive plan, basically including this audit, and make other discussion and decision as to what the zoning resolution should look like. And I'm going to limit the comments from the audience right now so that the steering committee can speak, because I've just had that request. Yes.
Cindy Engelman. So what you just said about the first part is to update the comprehensive plan to reflect the survey results. Where would that fall in, like with that recommendation slide? Would that be something that the trustees would take upon themselves, or are you looking for the steering committee to add that to the list of recommendations to go to the trustees? Because I think that bears merit, like the senior housing. You can't ask zoning commission to update senior housing, say to make it more difficult or limit where it might be permitted without updating the comprehensive plan to say that. So where would that come in?
I thought I said it, but I'm going to say it again. The trustees will amend the comprehensive plan. There's a resolution from 2015 that will probably be amended to reflect the new information that we are garnering here today.
Okay.
And incorporate it into it in some capacity. I don't know what that capacity looks like. It's going to be up to the trustees. Do we have OHM write new language for it? Or do we just take the information that we just received and tuck it in the back and say, here's the update? I can't speak for what the other trustees want to do. We will have to make that decision in a public meeting separate from today.
Okay.
And then it will be the zoning commission's job to make those things become a reality. And I'm sure that OHM would be available to assist the zoning commission in something of that nature.
Yeah, and Cindy, to just address it, we would add that to our recommendations list, because that is part of what we've been saying. It's just not explicitly, as you pointed out, explicitly listed there, but we would explicitly list to include that. Yes.
And then my next comment on number 3 there, update the zoning district map. Maybe it's more about reconciling the future land use map with existing zoning districts map or whatever, something like that.
I don't understand how we can update a future land use map that wasn't in the survey.
Say that again.
How can we update the future land use map that wasn't in the survey?
Well, what
The
is,
recommendation is for the zoning map to match the future land use map.
okay. So if over time, something is R1 and the house has been built on it, are you still going to zone that future land use, put in the future land use that it should be B2?
The future land use map stays the same according to the recommendation. It was not a part of the survey. It was not something we touched. It was not a part of the audit.
Okay.
Let me add to Cindy that the future land use map is again, it's a part of that vision document, that blueprint, but it's when you look at the zoning code, they talk about the comprehensive plan being a component to look at when looking at development applications. So that's part of the review that the zoning commission would do to see, what does that future land use map say? If a development proposal comes forward, maybe they're requesting to rezone that parcel in particular, and they take that into consideration. But technically it's still not the end all be all. The zoning commission could vote not to, rezone that property, even if that property, if the future land use maps indicates that it should be, let's say it's an R1 right now and it's supposed to go, the future land use map says it should be B2, for example. The zoning commission does not necessarily have to take that, as Bible and say, we have to rezone it that because the future land use map said so. There could be discussion, other aspects, other components of that they take under consideration, where it doesn't make sense for that rezoning to happen at that specific time. So what we're recommending specifically is just for the town center to match the current zoning map to match the town center that's shown on the future land use map.
Okay.
My hand's higher.
Oh, go ahead.
Brian, Kidd, I'd like to build on Paul's comments. We've worked hard to create this survey because we want to know what the people of the community really want. And we got our responses. And the thing that strikes me as something that should be pretty easy is that 900 out of 1,240 people are totally opposed to conservation developments. So logic tells me if we're going to listen to them, then we just recommend the elimination of future conservation developments.
And it's a recommendation that would have to go through legal because it's going to be very difficult to take something out of the zoning resolution that's been there. Mr. Studer, Jake Studer.
Yeah, and I have a comment kind of along that line. Just my observation is, our whole big, heart, friendly community is basically, in my opinion, telling seniors you aren't welcome. I don't see anything in here that would provide any kind of affordable housing in the community anymore. And you touched on litigation briefly, and Melissa, you did also. And I feel that we got to be very careful about the direction here of some of these things that we're suggesting and trying to do. This is all on record. You start telling people, okay, we're not letting seniors into the community. You start no different than before. There was talk about going from 2 acres to 5 acres, and you're talking to large landowners, farmers that may lose their 401k, at which I actually heard somebody in the community say, well, we don't care. Well, that goes back to the big, heart, friendly community aspect of all this. You start to change these things on record and mandate what's done, you're opening yourself up to litigation. And for a township our size to take on some of those battles is highly questionable. You start changing acreage parcels and saying, okay, well, you can't do that anymore. And I just feel, it's my observation. I think it's questionable on a lot of those areas. I completely understand design standards, and I think that's great. Same thing about conservation. No conservation, good luck. But having design standards to control and do the right things, if that's going to transpire, that's a whole different issue. So that's just my general observation. I was a part of this and I appreciate it, but I'm very concerned about those issues.
Yeah, and if I can address that, Jacob, and then Brian, your question, I think removing elements prohibiting uses in the code becomes a very slippery slope and allows for, Jacob, you mentioned litigation to occur, questions to be raised. So that's why in our recommendations is not to say, even with the survey results indicating that they don't want to see conservation development districts, for example, those are on the books right now. So outright removing that, again, kind of opens up the township and the community to potential litigation. So what we're saying is that, based on what we heard, based on what we saw from the survey results, what is a way to address that concern that the community is wary of the conservation developments without, putting the township and the community in a position where, someone comes in and, takes them to town with respect to litigation. So that's our way. And responding to your comment, Jacob, our way is to develop design standards to say this is what, in order for a development such as this, conservation development, senior housing, any of those uses that right now are just are deemed not desirable, from the community, from the survey results, just raising that level for the development to meet, to make sure that it would fit in with the character of the community.
Mm-hmm.
Maria Griffiths, when it comes to, I myself personally, with all due respect to Paul, is not a conservation development fan at all. However, having said that, why is it in our zoning? Because we lost in court once. As much as I agree with the community and the majority overwhelmingly said we don't want it, I have to say the best way around it is to limit it with design standards, because if we take it out, there's already precedent. We lost the first time around. I think it's just wasting a lot of township money because it'll end up in court again and we'll lose a second time. And when we lose, we don't get the choice in how it's done. If I recall, the court said how it was going to be done. By design standards, we have the chance to minimize its effect versus letting someone else choose for us at great cost to the township. So as much as I personally would love to strike it, I don't think that's the way to go.
Brian Cadnam, does that include making the standards so stringent that they can't cash flow a conservation development? In other words, make it economically almost unfeasible?
While I personally really like that idea, going back to Arthur mentioned, that's another one that'll probably land you in court on the losing end. I think we have to look and say, you have to make it feasible for within the area you're in, because a design standard in East Cleveland that's affordable is different from a design standard here that's different from a design standard in Gates Mills, and I would suspect we have to look at ones that elevate, make it a little more difficult, make someone think twice, but not so much that they can go to court and say this is ridiculous for this area.
If I can add to that, Maria and Brian too. I mean, as I mentioned, the example of just using setbacks as one sample, 30 feet right now, currently the design standards for the conservation development districts. And again, R1 and R2 are 90 and 75 respectively. So oftentimes in our history, when we've looked at developing those design standards, we look at, what are the area regulations for the zoning districts currently within the zoning code, right? So those are used as kind of a level. It's not to say that it would, absolutely be the same, because of what the intended purpose of those conservation developments are. But, those can be used as kind of a little bit of a measuring stick to rationalize why, for example, if we say, I'm just throwing out a number here, that it has to be a 50-foot setback in a conservation development, right? Why is it 50 foot? Well, in our R2, it's 75. In our R1, it's 90 feet, right? We're affording the opportunity for, additional residential development, but doing it in a what we feel, township feels, is a reasonable manner that matches our other residential zoning districts, just to use an example.
I think those are the old setbacks that you're mentioning. Are those the most current setbacks? Sheriff
Well,
Fisher?
Marcus.
Trustees amended that.
Because we amended it last
300
year.
feet.
So-
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the setback. He's talking about.
Front yard
Side-
setback.
but the
Yes.
Side setback.
And we were talking about a setback from the
Oh.
road.
From the house.
Right. But I thought
Yes,
we amended
individual-
the side
individual setbacks.
Too, but maybe I'm,
Not within a conservation.
okay,
One of the things that been.
okay.
Yeah, thank you. I should, I'm speaking front yard setback, not whoever was mentioning like how far away from the road.
Yeah,
That,
which we did increase last year dramatically.
Correct.
What we did was we used the current conservation development in Hinckley Township as precedent.
Right.
Instead of just coming up with a random number so that if there was litigation, it would uphold the board.
correct.
I just had one other question in regards to that, in regard to design standards, because there was question of how the conservation land, where it was placed within the development, the strip behind everyone versus something not accessible or on. Can that be zoned to, say how and where that part is, or is that something that's?
Yeah, I mean, there's ways. I'm just trying to think back at other guidelines. Yeah.
Here with it, is right, so the pushback would come. So
I can't hear. I'm really struggling hearing.
He's a soft speaker.
Yeah.
Everybody is.
That was the goal last year with the zoning amendment that was made. We pushed back the subdivision so that the first lot couldn't start within 300 feet of the right of way of the road. So the goal was to push back the subdivision and therefore encourage conservation land to be moved to the front, because they can't have anything else within that 300-foot buffer. Surely they don't want to have a 300-foot buffer plus have conservation back, so it pushes it towards the front. We did that without saying it had to be conservation land, but the logical step is the subdivision, the developer is going to put some conservation land in the front. We also created a 100-foot envelope around the entire subdivision to again try to create some buffer between the neighbors that are not part of the subdivision and people in the subdivision. So that was the goal.
Excellent. Thank you. That answers my question.
And the zoning commission really has done a fantastic job of working to minimize the impact of a conservation development. Based on these results, and in reading the zoning resolution, really need to work on senior housing. Senior housing is a one-page, very broad descriptive that almost anybody can utilize. So we probably need to work on that. Terry, you had your hand raised. Terry Walrath.
Terry Walrath. I have a question about the recommendation number 2, identifying lands for conservation. How would that work? Are Mr. and Mrs. Smith going to get a letter one day and say, dear Mr. and Mrs. Smith, we have identified your lands for conservation. Your 50-acre lot is no longer subject to being developed. You have to let it sit there. Good luck and thank you for your contribution.
Right. No, that would not be the scenario. The scenario would be to identify, lands obviously that would be desirable for conservation, but it would not force. We're not making any recommendation to force any landowner to not be able to develop it as it's currently zoned. So we're not saying create a new zoning district or anything of that nature. Again, to force, when they're ready to sell or they want to change the use or any, property changes hands. No, it's identifying property and developing a plan that if it were to become available, looking at that as an option either for the township to purchase, going towards conservation, or working with some of those other organizations that we mentioned. Those organizations that we mentioned, effectively, they kind of create a rough blueprint, we talk blueprint again, but a rough blueprint of lands they're identifying that make sense for conservation, due to the environmental characteristics that are there, due to size, due to a number of things that they would identify. And it's just as those lands start to become available, slowly piecing it together. The example that I can give that we've assisted on in several cases is what West Creek Conservancy has been doing in the city of Parma to create the West Creek Reservation. That was a 20 plus year labor of love of identifying environmentally sensitive lands around West Creek and other parcels, and working slowly to strategically purchase those lands to put it as part of the Cleveland Metro Parks reservation, as well as the West Creek Conservancy reservation. So it's not necessarily an exact science. It's not forcing, asking to force people out of their land or out of the ability to reasonably use their land. It's just kind of a high level strategic plan from the township, working with, potentially working with those partners or just from the township itself to say when that land comes available, we want to talk about, potentially purchasing it either by the township or with one of those partners to start building that conservation land.
And how would your, what was the name for your tax that you were the tax levy that you would pass, your green space levy? It's pretty vague at this point. What kind of millage would you be talking about?
Couldn't even tell you, Terry, honestly.
The trustees to determine. I think in the past it was Martha Catherwood and Ron Garapek that pushed for that, and it went to the ballots, and it didn't pass, but it wasn't by much. I think it was like a 60-40 or something.
Brian Cadnam, I want to remind you, Jerry, that the 1,240 people that responded to the survey were the people that cared the most about our community. Or at least I'd say that's a fairly safe assumption. And just because this group would approve the levy, it doesn't mean the community as a whole would. But I would also like to add that there's something called purchasing of development rights, where you take a property and an entity basically pays the owner and then owns the right to develop or not develop, takes the property and essentially divides it into two sections, the physical property and the development rights. This is something that's been done in major cities, including Boulder, Colorado, that area, to accomplish basically what we're trying to accomplish in terms of conserving some open space and some farmland. It's just a concept that if we don't already know about, it needs to be introduced.
I don't think that under Ohio Revised Code we have the opportunity to do that.
Well, I can't argue with you. I don't know that.
Yeah, I think we're very limited in our powers as a township.
What is Western Reserve land?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Dave Yasko.
Western Reserve Land Conservancy is an opportunity, no different than Medina County Parks, Metro Parks, Cleveland Metro Parks, but it's for private owners to contact. I know that Western Reserve Conservancy was out last year and did a talk here. They have pretty strict regulations as to what they will be a part of based on acreage, where maybe the Metro Parks and the Medina County Park System aren't so stringent in those regulations.
Do they do like what Brian was saying with that? Because I think their lands can't be.
I don't believe so. I think they have to be donated.
If I could answer that, I want to say at least 15 or 20 years ago when I was on the zoning commission, there was a big push for what Brian's talking about right now. And I think it was the Western Reserve Land Conservancy did come in here and put on programs. And there were, I think, a number of people who, if you wanted to, you could give the Conservancy District an easement, a conservation easement over any part of your property that you wanted to. If you had 10 acres and you weren't doing anything with the back 5 acres or 7 acres, you could give the Conservancy District and a conservation easement in perpetuity over whatever part of your property you wanted to. And I think there were a number of people who did that at that time.
I guess the difference is that.
I'm sorry, who's talking?
I'm sorry, Brian Cadnam. The difference is that this development rights concept I'm talking about, it's actually an entity which is purchased, and you're saying something that's donated.
They end up with it, whether they purchase or whether it's donated. The conservation entity ends up with the conservation rights to that property.
Brian Cadnam, I understand that, but you'd get more participation if a person could actually sell the development rights.
Oh, I don't doubt that. Yeah, you always get more participation for money. Yeah.
That's correct. You always get more. I'm really struggling hearing everybody.
Terry, would you repeat that for her?
I say you always get more participation when there's money involved.
It's a very important part of this document for today, so thank you for saying that.
Can I take like a 2-minute break? I just want to, I can't hear anything.
Okay, we will take a 5-minute break at 8 o'clock and resume at 8:05.
And for the virtual audience, it is 8:05. We will be resuming.
Everybody use the pen.
Over the break, I had conversations with Arthur, specific to our contract, and I pulled it up here. Under the task number 3, one of the things it states is present, review, discuss comprehensive plan audit memorandum. And I think that if OHM were to put together a memorandum of the findings of this survey, it would give us what we all want, which is maybe a better understanding of how to address senior housing, how to address conservation developments. And so I wanted to see if the steering committee was in agreement on that.
If I can also add to, that'll also include
Hold on one second. Hold on one second. I can't hear. Struggling hearing. I'm sorry. Give me a minute.
Okay, for the virtual audience, we're having technical issues, so we're gonna pause for another 5 minutes. We will resume at 8:12.
No, that was all.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are resuming. Technical difficulties are over. We're going to ask the people in the audience just to quiet down, please, so the steering committee can continue their conversation. We had a question about what a memorandum is, which would be a written document to add to the resolution so that it would mimic the findings of the audit and be able to be added to the current comprehensive plan.
And that would also include, Arthur Schmidt, that would also include the survey summary results and just overall results to be included in that. So that way, as we were talking about before, as considerations are coming up with respect to zoning decisions and development, those results can be taken into consideration.
Thank you.
So where do we go from here? As our committee, I mean.
We write on our...
Any more comments? Sorry, Tom Schroeder.
On our end, it's writing up that memo.
And on our end?
Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
I think we still, Brian, Ken, we still have time for some additional thoughts. One thing that I have wondered all along is, since obviously keeping Hinckley rural includes limited growth in housing and business, do we have the power as a township to increase our cost of our building permit? Because it's very low now.
That's a very good question. Something we've been working on over the course of the last 6 months since I took over zoning was to update the fee schedule that has not been updated since 2018. That was given to the trustees at the last meeting on the 7th, last Tuesday, and we will have further conversation and probably go ahead and agree to either change them further or agree to the things that were updated. We did pretty much raise almost all of our fees in looking in comparison to Brunswick Hills, Montville, and Sharon Township as compared to ours. So that is a variable. One of the things that we saw when we calculated how much money we spend on a map amendment, for instance, I think we were charging roughly $500, but our fees were over $700. So we did make considerable changes to the fee schedule.
Mr. Kevin, we can't make money on it.
Correct.
So if you're looking at like costing somebody out from doing something, we do that.
We have to just cover our costs. The township's not in the business of making money.
That's something I'm not familiar with. I was fully expecting to make money and make it difficult to build houses.
To make money and make it difficult to build houses.
I support that, Brian.
Thank you.
Anyone?
That's not a dirty word.
I was going to say, anything else from the committee before we give it to the people here who have been waiting patiently? And I really don't imagine that this is going to go much longer. I give the folks in the audience maybe another 15 minutes. Maria?
I just want to throw out back to Terry's question about, identifying lands for conservation. Arthur mentioned the West Creek development up in Parma. I'm Ukrainian. I've been going to Parma my entire life. That's where we hang out.
Yeah.
And I've watched that go from, as a child to being rough stuff with radio towers, to taking my kids when they had one path with a sign that said future, to be this stunningly incredible park with walkways, a conservation center and stuff. Those people, there were ones willing to do it, and some of them did get less for their land. It's not forcing when you identify it as possible development that you can't sell it to someone else, but it offers that person the opportunity. And there are some people who say, I only need this much money and I'm going to forego the rest for a legacy because I want to have that legacy tied to me. And that's not making anyone have to, but I think it's worth it to identify those areas and offer those people that opportunity. I'm just throwing it as a counter.
Jerry Walrath, I agree completely. I mean, there will be those people who want to do that, like, he's not here tonight, but Mr. Gibson just gave the township a big chunk of land, and good for him, for people who want to do it.
And Maria, if I can also add, and Terry, again, we talked about in the question developing a green space tax levy. There was lots of questions, obviously, from the comments about what that is, what that entails, the mills, everything like that. That's one course of action, but that's not the only course of action. So the recommendation is more around the identification of those lands for future conservation, the mechanisms that are used in order to purchase, obtain, have them donated, et cetera, et cetera. That goes back to having further discussion of what makes sense. And that's why we talked about some of those other organizations who are able to work out those transactions essentially and could be partnered with as a recommendation. But what those are, and even to what the land is, I just go back to those two maps that we mentioned. The future land use map does talk about where there's, the desire for limited growth. So that's an area to look. Not saying that's the only area to look, but that's a place to start looking through that. And then really, one of our first steps, if we were to do something like that, is to look at the environmentally sensitive areas. I mean, those to us would be kind of no-brainers in some ways to start looking at. Not to say that it would be, preserved or conserved, but that's just a place to start to look at.
Well, if I could add, Terry Walrath, if I could add one final thought. I mean, what all this boils down to, or a lot of it anyway, when my wife and I moved here 32 years ago, we wanted to slam the door behind us, and we didn't want any of you people here. And the old timers would tell me, well, we wanted to slam the door, so you didn't come here. And ever since then, it's been successive waves of people trying to figure out how to make it harder for people to move into Hinckley, which is what it amounts to.
How many residents were there, Tom Schrader? How many residents were there when you came, Karen? Roughly,
How many residents
were there when he came? We're located in Hinckley.
If I had to say, Tom, I'd say 5,700 or something like that.
Anyone else from the committee?
I just wanted to make a public, just a statement. Earlier, I implied or said that I didn't think certain, that the zoning commission and some of the trustees didn't care. And that's not what I intended to say. I believe that everyone cares, heat of the moment. So I didn't mean to offend anyone, Architecture Committee or the trustees. So just want to say that.
Anyone else? Well, I want to thank all of you. And I've said it a million times in emails and publicly that we could not have done this without you. And I'm very grateful for your service to Hinckley. So thank you.
Jack and I are thankful too.
And so we will open it to the floor. If anyone would like to speak, they can come to the podium and
They can take this one.
be nice and loud. Thank you. Any comments from the audience?
Of
course, I have something to say. Your name one more time.
Natasha Kalis, 1809 Ridge Road. I do also thank everybody for the time and patience. And this has been a very heated conversation because it's important. The community really appreciates this, and there's clear discrepancies that need to change. And I appreciate that we came back with some zoning recommendations because that's really going to be what governs those changes. So I really think that's smart. And thinking about the comprehensive plan and saying, hey, we can't change the future land use map because we didn't talk about it, that's valid. But in the same vein, we can't change the zoning code to reflect that because we didn't talk about it. So it's not fair to blanket change the zoning code for something we didn't talk about because there's clear discrepancies with the community on other issues. So I think we need to focus on the things that came up, change those things, set some guardrails. There's definitely gray areas and loopholes that created some unfavorable things that happened. Like we all came here and probably moved in a place that used to be a farm. So I appreciate that there's going to be developments, but how do we create guardrails, guidelines? And I think that we're on the right track with setting up those zoning regulations or those zoning code changes. However, the land use map was not talked about, and I really don't feel comfortable changing that as a blanket way right now. Like, I don't think we touched on that in the survey. We just can't do that. I don't think that we've have any evidence to do that. So, but I do appreciate everybody. You guys did awesome, and this was a heated conversation. And I do think that as a community coming together and dropping, some of our ego, some of our personal biases, everybody kind of really did show that they came to the table, pros and cons of things, weighed it out. And even people that live in conservation developments were like, hey, okay, if this isn't what the community wants. I mean, it was a beautiful thing. So I appreciate being part of it, and thank you guys.
Also,
Anyone else?
Do it different. John Kalis, 1809 Ridge Road. So how many questions on the survey were about the conservation developments? Does anybody know offhand?
One.
There was one question, and then there was nothing else?
Kind of two.
Two, because you had a selection of what type of developments you wanted.
Yes.
I'm sorry, who's talking?
Paul Easterling.
Oh.
So, okay, so there was two questions. Okay, so I guess what I'm just wondering is if this is something that we couldn't change anyways, like, because that's all I'm hearing about is everybody spoke out adamantly that they don't want conservation developments, right? And the questions that were posed on there, there's two questions on there. Why did we have them on there?
I think we kind of talked about this in one of them, that they were on there so that we then know to say, yes, we can't get rid of them, but how do we guide those? Do we make those guidelines, those building standards and stuff based on that? If everyone said, no, we love them the way they are, we love the newest ones, then we wouldn't be thinking of changing those setbacks and those standards. And I think the idea was, how can we best do within our limits of the courts to do it. So I think they were valid to give guidelines to the zoning commission, to the trustees. It's kind of like we talked about water. We said, well, is there really money for water? Well, it gives a guideline to the trustees to say, should we be looking at going after available money or should we not? It's not an instant yes, no, but it gives a working framework.
It kind of brought in from a bunch of the meetings, whether it be zoning, whether it's trustees, board of zoning appeals, issues that came up. So certain things were identified and said, okay, is this something we should get a wider opinion on? Certain things cannot be eliminated, we found out legally. You can't say no to conservation, but it is a concern. People now want to see it regulated, if regulated is the right word, or controlled, or guidelines increased on it. That was an identified need. Now it's brought on to everybody else that in the power, whether it be zoning and trustees, to develop those guidelines.
Okay, that's fair.
Paul Easterling, it's important to note the question said additional.
Yes.
Development, not, it had nothing to do with things that were already there.
Okay. And I don't have it in front of me, obviously. I filled it out and sent it in, right?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I filled it out and I sent it in. I don't have it in front of me to look at, so. Thank you. One more thing, I guess, and this is going to be for a time later, but we're talking about people giving land and working with other agencies and organizations, the possibility of acquiring more, turning it into parks and doing things along that line. We are going to have to be careful there too, because there's going to be people that are salivating to take those opportunities then, because there are no freebies and everything's going to come. Every grant comes with conditions. And I watch the way some of these other organizations work in Cuyahoga County, like Nowaka, and I see how aggressive they are, and we don't want any part of that here. So I'm going to be watching that very closely. And I think everyone should, because that will absolutely change the dynamic. We start taking money, we start taking handouts from people, there it goes out the window like that, right? So that's all. I think we need to keep a close eye on it. Thank you all again. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Come on up.
Hi, my name's David Terry. I live in Canyon Creek Estates, and I'm a real estate developer. I understand people talking about the conservation area. Am I wrong in saying it has to be at least 100 acres?
You're correct. Correct.
I don't think we have enough land to worry about to make it an issue. There are very few. I'm a developer and I look for land to build and develop in. And I don't think we have that. My suggestion is we drop it down to a 50-acre site and create conversation. However, that's not going to go in this town. Okay?
At least you know it.
Yeah, right. And my suggestion is if you're concerned in one of the things that this gentleman brought up here, I've been here 50 years, almost 50 years. There was like less than 5,000 people here when I moved here. Developers call them nibbies. Do you know what that means? Not in my backyard. Okay. And I deal with this on a daily basis as a developer. We don't mean any wrong. We're just trying to supply the demand. We have a massive housing shortage in this whole country. And to sit there and say, we don't want any new homes built in our community, and every town you go to has the same answer. So what happens to us? Pitch tents downtown Cleveland? I mean, think about it. I was born in 1940. There were 110 million people in this country. Today, there's 330 million people. In my lifetime alone, it's tripled. I would say in another 80 some years, we're going to have 1 billion people in this country, and they got to live somewhere.
They got to eat too.
Good point.
Who said that?
Dave Yatzkin. No place to grow food. No food. I guess the population's down.
Yeah, we're having that problem too in this country. So the only thing that'll correct that, and I said this once in a North Rolton meeting, the only thing that'll do that is birth control. Okay? That's what it's going to take. Like China did.
We got to stay on topic. I don't want to insult you. We can't go that direction.
Okay. So the whole thing is that this conservation area, I don't think it's a big issue because much of Hinckley topography is not user friendly to a developer. And I want to change the subject here. Downtown Hinckley, from a developer's eyes, when we bring utilities, I brought the water line up 130th and into Hinckley, and I paid for that out of my own pocket when I developed that. And then somebody developed that and took it further east. But the next step into downtown is going through that rock. And I don't know how you're going to put sewers and water in there and make it attempting for a developer to come in and do it. Not only that, many of the parcels in the downtown area are small parcels. To assemble all that would be cost prohibitive. I don't see a future downtown at this point. Maybe you could get some type of a septic system put in, a central septic system put in, but I don't know how you're going to do sewers. And not only that, the sewage treatment plants on Boston and Ridge Road down by Valley Air Golf Course, and you got a lot of hills to go up and down. So, and I happen to be a plumber by trade. The only thing I know that any type of sewage that I ever put in had to go downhill so it would drain. And it's other than that, we're going to have to pump it. And they don't allow pumping in Medina County. They ban them. And what brought that on was the problem they had on Boston Road when they ran the sewer down there, and they put numerous pump stations in there. And the cost to maintain them is a fortune. And I sympathize with them. I understand what they had to deal with. So I don't know all the answers we're sitting here, but and then the last thing is that I was surprised that they don't want some form of senior housing. I'm at that age and I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to leave this community. I've had most of my life here. So I hope that in the future, if somebody decides to bring a development on and to consider the fact that there's other people in this community that are going to reach those ages. I tried to do this on Ridge Road or on Boston, or I'm sorry, on 303 a few years ago, and that didn't go. So maybe it'll come around sometime in the future. But anyway, thank you. And thank you for your everything you've done in that. And I was kind of pleased with a lot of it. Thank you.
Anyone else from the audience? Do we have anyone virtually that would like to raise their hand? Are you seeing anybody? No? All right, well, if there's nothing else.
One more. I have one more. Can I?
Yes,
I talk, but besides the committee, and it's been great working with everyone, and we were talking that we've gotten to know a lot of members of the community and opened a lot of different thought processes and ideas, into what people want and need. But I want to thank everyone else because most of you have been here for have been active participants, have listened, have voiced opinions, and whether you're on committee or not, I think you were an important part of the process. Thank you.
I have something from Melissa and Jack. The girls asked me in the office today if do they have to keep the opened envelopes that are empty, or can they toss them? I would think they could toss them. They're empty. It's not the still sealed surveys that we received after the deadline, just the empty envelopes. Can we toss them?
I don't see any reason to keep them. The surveys were stamped the days they were received.
Well, they stamped the envelope, not the survey, right?
They stamped. Oh, that was my understanding.
They stamped the survey.
Oh, okay.
Because part of our input, we put in the date received that was on the stamp.
Okay.
So it was the survey number, date received, and then all the answers and comments.
We'll be very happy.
Yeah, that's typical past practice. When we get a piece of mail, right, we just toss them.
That's what I thought, but Susan doesn't want to throw anything out. So
it's a record.
I will let her know they can toss them.
Thank you.
Were the survey numbers tracked in your results in the
Yes.
Excel sheet?
Yes. Yeah. So in the Excel spreadsheet, the first column is the survey number we inputted, the date received, and then we go through the answers and additional comments. So when those raw results from the Excel spreadsheet are there, you'll see that all in a single line together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
Holly Sterling, will today's presentation be made available to the committee?
Yes.
Yes, and it will be on the website for all of our citizens as well. That's a good question. Well, thank you all. This has been enlightening for me. And like I said at the beginning, it's very difficult for a trustee to get something tangible that we can identify what the people want. And I think you guys just all did a phenomenal job. And again, thank you to everybody in Hinckley that participated at any level. You have a question or
Just a question.
can you come up to the podium?
Yeah. Angela Chestnut, 2362 Country Road Drive. I just wanted to know, what is the time frame for going forward then? Like, when will you have your results submitted?
Before the end of the month. We'll submit our information, the memo that we mentioned. We'll submit our memo that we mentioned by the end of the month.
Okay.
Yes.
Then you guys will present it.
We amend our resolution and then it'll be up to the zoning commission.
So when do you think that'll be, like within like a week after that, or?
It just depends on the timing of the meeting and when I get that. Yeah, it shouldn't be too long.
Okay.
Anyone else? All right, this time I would like to adjourn at 8:37 p.m. Can I get a second by one of the trustees? Seconded by Astral. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you guys so much.
Earliest finish time.